Hello and welcome to this broadcast by Brexit Watch. I'm your host, Jonathan Saxty. Today we are absolutely delighted to welcome the leader of the Brexit Party, Nigel Farage. Nigel, a real pleasure to welcome you today.
No, pleased to be here and, following very closely your work. It is always important to keep tabs on these people. It really is.
Nigel, let's jump straight into the conversation. Based on what you have seen over the last few months with the coronavirus crisis, with Brexit, with the crossings and with the woke agenda, do you still have faith in Boris Johnson and this Conservative government?
What Conservative government? How are they Conservative? Please explain to me. I mean, they look like a bunch of Metro liberals. I mean, how can it be that we have Churchill's statue being vandalised, public statues being chucked in a dock in Bristol, the cenotaph being desecrated, and the government say nothing, nothing. Just every now and again, after an opinion poll comes out, Boris makes a comment and the Daily Mail say, hurrah, we've got a Prime Minister that's standing up for law and order and respect and decency. They have bowed down before the woke agenda. They have, I'm afraid, filled their cabinet up with a group of people who are sort of, kids with rich daddies who played at politics at university, never had a proper job, and then decided this would be their career. I think the biggest problem they've got is they don't look competent. Whether it's the in-out, hokey-cokey, shake it all about on quarantine rules, whether Croatia's in or out, or Portugal's in or out, or Bolton's in lockdown or not. They look to be as if they're being pushed around by events rather than leading events. And look, I know it's not been easy to deal with this. On schools and exam results, again, all over the place. Whether it's 8 or 12 distinctive U-turns, I couldn't tell you, but it's clearly quite a lot. And on the Channel crossings, well, look, part of Brexit and part of the appeal that Boris had to the electorate last December was that we were going to be taking back control. And that meant taking back control of our borders, putting in an Australian-style point system, which basically people took to mean taking in those that were qualified, spoke the language, obeyed the law, all the rest of it. But also a very specific promise that numbers would come down. And what we see is a daily, at least when it's calm, a daily humiliation across the English Channel. The official number for yesterday is 409 people. That's without the ones, of course, who slipped away unseen, of which I'm sure there were quite a few. And on legal immigration, the figures to March show that 715,000 people settled in the country in 1 year, a net of almost 1/3 So both legal and illegal immigration are running at all-time highs. And that doesn't just damage the government on competence, it damages the government on trust. And that's an even more serious issue. So whichever way you cut this, there are very large numbers of people who voted Conservative, who believed in Boris Johnson. And I won't say that that support has completely evaporated, but goodness me, I tell you what, it's hanging on by not much more than a thread. And against that, Starmer, well, he may not be spectacular, he may not be laugh a minute, but at least, I tell you what, he's not Jeremy Corbyn, is he? He's not scary. He's not bringing the associations of Palestinian extremism, anti-Semitism, taxing the rich to hell. I mean, after all, Rishi's going to do that anyway. So I think we're in a position here where I would say Starmer has made a half-decent start. To win an election, given how far Labour are behind, is a hell of a mountain to climb. But I do think, and this is the one thing I would say for certain, outside of Brexit, I feel that what Boris Johnson, Dominic Cummings, and perhaps a bit of Michael Gove have done is to fill the cabinet up with lightweights, to fill the cabinet up with people that will not pose them any difficulties, will more or less do as they're told. And I think they need to sack a few people, not just blame the civil service for everything, sack a few people, because there are actually some wiser heads on the backbenches of people who've not just had experience in politics, but experience in the real world as well. And I do think that Boris needs quite quickly to make us think that he's surrounded by people who know what they're doing.
Nigel, you've made a big splash recently about the border crossings. You touched on that just now. Yeah. I believe the Home Secretary has spoken about repealing certain laws, and I believe it's bad laws, bad regulations, treaties. I may be wrong about that. I think that's what she said. What does the government need to do? What is it failing to do right now? What should it do?
What it is doing, it's got a Home Secretary who talks tough. We will fight them on the beaches, says Priti Patel. We're going to send RAF planes up. Oh, we've got a new military drone. Have a look in the newspapers. We've released a picture of it. We've appointed a former Royal Marine to be it. It's all going to be... Look, it wouldn't matter if you put what's left of the entire Royal Navy in the Channel. If the rules as they currently stand are that once somebody gets across our 12-mile line, they're entitled to a 4-star hotel, free medical and dental care, 3 meals a day, and 40 quid a week spending money. Of course they're going to keep coming, because they're not going to get that in France or anywhere else inside the European Union. What she needs to do, very clearly, is to have a look at what Tony Abbott did when he was Prime Minister of Australia. All right, the Australians had 2 big migratory waves that were coming to it from Indonesia. And when Tony Abbott was Prime Minister, he started off by just towing the boats back to Indonesia, quite simple, to, of course, the international condemnation of the European Union, the United Nations, but he did it. And then he made it clear that anybody that came to Australia via that route illegally would not be allowed to stay. Simple as, full stop, end of. And you know what happened? The boats stopped coming. And what that means is this is about political will. Now, a part of the legal problem is the legislation that Blair put in place for how we would deal with people who came illegally was ridiculously overgenerous. That needs to be addressed, all right? Also, it is true that as part of our EU membership, and effectively we've left, we had the great big party in Parliament Square, and that was fantastic, but we're still stuck with the rule book. The Dublin regulations do drive a coach and horses through everything we've understood about refugee claims since the Geneva Convention definitions of all of this back in 1951, namely that asylum seekers can claim asylum not in the first safe country they come to inside the European Union, but the first safe country they lodge their papers. And that's a bit of a wrangle. So yes, absolutely, we need to absolutely know completely by the 1st of January that anybody that comes from France will be sent back to France, because we won't be bound by the Dublin regulations, and France is a safe country. But are we really going to stand here and wait till January the 1st? Are we really going to, watch another 5,000 or 10,000 people come when the cost of administering all of this and putting people up in hotels and elsewhere is now 1 billion sterling every single month? So yes, 2 big legislative changes are needed, but what's really needed is a change of political will. And I don't doubt that in her heart, Priti Patel wants to do the right thing. The question is, what about Boris? Now, Boris, when he was Mayor of London, on more than one occasion, proposed wholesale amnesties for all illegal immigrants. So maybe Boris needs to do a U-turn, a constructive U-turn, a personal U-turn, and ditch his metropolitan liberal views on all of this and understand where conservative voting England is. Because 97% of people in a recent poll, 97% of conservative voters said they were concerned or very concerned about what's going on in the English Channel.
Nigel, you mentioned January the 1st. Obviously, the EU-UK transition negotiations are still underway. Do you have faith that a true and proper Brexit will be delivered, given the withdrawal agreement, the Northern Irish Protocol? And if they go ahead, will Boris Johnson be able to follow through on all his other Brexit promises?
Well, look, I mean, the withdrawal agreement itself was an absolute disaster. And I remember that morning in Brussels, 5 o'clock in the morning with my lawyer, going through that document line by line and realizing it was just Mrs. May's deal. The only difference was that Northern Ireland effectively had been cut off from the rest of the United Kingdom to save the rest of the UK being trapped inside the customs union. I was vehemently opposed to the withdrawal agreement, particularly because there were very specific commitments within it, if you actually read the thing, that made fisheries look like they'd continue as they currently were, that bound us on state aid rules, and effectively, binding us to a form of alignment. I mean, it was all there in the document. It wasn't very hard to read and to see, and yet the Conservative Party said, oh, isn't Boris marvellous? It's absolutely marvellous. And Ian Duncan Smith saying it's tremendous. And people like Jacob Rees-Mogg saying, isn't it wonderful? And I kept thinking, no, it's not wonderful at all. It's awful. What we then got from Boris was a promise, as the general election hove into view, that in fact they would not go along the path of political and regulatory alignment, and that we'd act thereafter as an independent country. And it's a theme, to be fair to David Frost, that he's repeated again and again and again. I kind of get why Barnier's upset, because Barnier thought he had a deal, and Boris said it was oven ready. And now we've changed our minds. But here's the point. The British electorate voted for us not to be tied to those rules. And that, I think, does supersede what was in the agreement. For Boris and his team to give in at this stage to what Barnier wants, and he was pretty clear in Dublin yesterday that nothing's changed as far as he's concerned. For the Johnson government to give in to that would be not just a breach of contract with the British people, it would be a complete, another, just as Mrs. May tried before, complete betrayal of Brexit. And with that hanging by a thread support that I spoke about a few minutes ago would disappear, would literally disappear. I mean, this would be the chance for Labour perhaps to win the next election, and I doubt Boris could even survive long as leader. And you know what? I think they know that. I think they know that. I did meet a cabinet minister last week, and I said to him, if you mess this up, we're going to come and kill you once again. This time possibly for good. So there's something in me that says that their basic sense of self-survival means they will not collapse to all of those demands. I suspect that there will be a deal that'll be struck at the last minute. I suspect that it's not going to give all the things that I would want and that the Brexit Party would want, but I suspect it won't be so bad that it leaves a big chink of daylight for others to come in. That's what I think will happen. I mean, frankly, all the while we pursue, we're happy to leave with Australian-style rules, no deal. If we're bold enough to live with that, then Barnier may well concede on some of these points. But the future survival of Boris Johnson as Premier and his historical legacy hangs on these next few weeks.
Nigel, that leads very nicely to my next question, which is, if worst case scenario happens, what will be the role of the Brexit Party and your role in that?
Well, take my jacket off. And I mean, what choice would I have? I mean, 25 years I've been fighting with it. 25 years. I mean, it's akin to madness what I've done with my life, because I believe that breaking free of this European club was the right thing to do. Firstly, for us, and secondly, I genuinely think as an example to the other European nation states. Yeah, I mean, look, if they drop the ball completely on this, they will have to be fought hard. But I've said very little, Jonathan. I've said very little over the last few weeks and months, because it struck me as being fairly pointless to give a daily commentary on briefs to newspapers, which one day say we'll leave with no deal, which the next day say we're going to surrender and give up on everything. So I've chosen not to speculate. And this really, to be honest with you, It's the first time I've spoken at length about this for a long, long while. You know, it's a negotiation. It's going on. I've done my best to try and keep faith in the British government on this. And I started off with Mrs. May that way, but I soon turned once I saw her checkers plan. At the moment, our chief negotiator is sticking to the right script. At the moment.
Nigel, leaving Brexit for a moment, I'd like to just switch to matters in the United States. It's easy to forget we've got a big election coming up there just a few months from now. What's your assessment of what is going on right now? I mean, are we looking at some kind of constitutional crisis in America? Lots of social unrest. What do you think is going to happen over the next few months? What's your prediction for November?
Well, the extreme left have become very extreme, haven't they? Antifa, elements of the Black Lives Matters movement. I mean, these are neo-Marxist street protest movements. They are intent on bringing down Western civilization, and I really mean that. They want to get rid of the capitalist free market system. They want to defund the police forces. I mean, these are very, very dangerous forces that masquerade and dress themselves up as being social justice warriors. And a lot of people in America who emotionally thought that Black Lives Matter should be supported because they could see there are problems. I mean, America's very different to here, and there are problems in America with racial issues. There's no question about that. But a lot of fair-minded people who wanted to give Black Lives Matter support because they believed that a campaign for racial equality was, if you like, the kind of updating of what Martin Luther King and others fought for half a century ago. Well, I tell you what, the scales have now lifted because they're now seeing this organization, or certainly large parts of it, for what it really is. If you look at the approval ratings, you see that Black Lives Matter now as an organization has a negative rating in America. So people are waking up to this. I honestly think that these new forces of the left are extremely dangerous. The most dangerous things we've seen across the West for many, many, many decades. And that is where Joe Biden is in a bit of a bind, because there's a fairly large section, a large activist section to the left of his party, to the left of his vote, that means that he cannot criticize Antifa. He cannot question the legitimacy of the funding streams and the people that run Black Lives Matter. He can't do that, or he loses that chunk of the vote. And so it's quite easy for Donald Trump to say, look, this guy is soft on crime, you know. And I think if you were living in the suburb of a big city and you had a house and a mortgage, you ran a business, you got a couple of teenage kids, you may find the outspoken New Yorker a little bit rich for your blood. You know, you may find he's not quite what you expect American presidents to be. But you look at Biden, who could become a hostage to the left of his party, and you look at Trump, who's got the police force and others very much on his side. Well, I know in those circumstances which I would choose. And I think this rapidly is going to come down to being a law and order general election in the USA. And I've watched with amusement commentators in this country saying it's a slam dunk, Biden's won, Trump's got no chance. It's all a replay of what we saw back in 2016. I would say 100% of those that go out to vote on November the 3rd, Donald Trump will win a majority in the Electoral College. I'll say that 100%. What I don't know is the extent to which this early mail-in voting, the US equivalent of our postal voting, is being used and potentially abused. But if we finished up with a situation where 10 days after Trump's won the election, it turns out actually Biden's won the election, then America's going to be in very real trouble. And one of the things that we tried to do in the Brexit Party was to wake people up to the scale of abuse with postal voting in our country. So that is the dark cloud that hangs over the US election. And I just don't know at this stage what the numbers involved are. No one does. I am told there are parts of the West Coast where there are electoral districts where there are 112% voters as against the population, meaning lots of people who are dead are still potentially going to be able to register for early mail-in votes. So that's the worry. But overall, as far as the campaign shaping up, I think Trump's in a good place.
I think that's a good place on which to end it. We've covered a lot today. So Nigel Farage, thank you very much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.